All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to give people maybe another couple, 3 minutes to get logged in here to Zoom, and we'll get our webinar underway. So thanks for being here, and we'll be started here shortly. All right, it looks like we've hit the top of the hour, and we'll give folks maybe another minute to get signed into our webinar here before we get things rolling. All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here today, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Holiday Shutdowns, Part 2 in this series, Proving the Financial Value of Facility Turndowns. My name is Erica Baum. I'm the Administrative Coordinator for APPA, and just a couple of housekeeping details before we get started here. The webinar recording will be posted to our website under the Professional Development tab within 24 hours, as well as on our Vimeo page. You'll also be receiving a follow-up email from our host, EnergyCAP, with a link to the recording as well. This webinar qualifies for 1 professional development hour. Credits will automatically be uploaded to your Member Compass account transcripts. And if you have any questions about that, please feel free to get a hold of me at APPA. Afterwards, I can walk you through that process if you're new to it. All attendees for this webinar will be in listen-only mode. You may have noticed that the chat room is open. That chat room today is open to everyone, so we can all hear from and speak to each other. It looks like Daniela at EnergyCAP has started off the afternoon by putting a link to part 1 of this series in the chat room. So if you'd like to watch that later, please make a note of that. We also are, as our leader here, Tom, will reiterate in a moment, we are open to Q&A throughout the presentation. So please feel free to use that chat window for that purpose as well. At this time, then, it is my pleasure to turn over the floor to Tom Diliberti of EnergyCAP. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. And yes, as Erica said, just reiterating, just as I introduced myself today, a little bit of my background is I began my professional career as a teacher. So I stood up in front of hundreds of students through the years, and I'm very comfortable in the environment to try to answer questions as we go. I know I genuinely like to try to help people to the best of my ability. And so if you have questions that are timely and you'd like to interject them in the middle of the presentation, please don't hesitate to do so, because I'm happy to help out. So with that said, a little bit more about me. I mentioned I started my career as a teacher and then transitioned into the energy management space. And I've been doing that now for more than 20 years. I've partnered with more than 250 organizations all around the country. Many of them have been K-12 school districts or higher education locations, as well as other organizations as well. But the spirit of all of my work has always been with this idea of energy conservation and trying to help the culture and help organizations become as efficient as possible. The tool that I've used during all of this time is EnergyCAP. So I'm really passionate about the tool that we offer, EnergyCAP. And I just had this up here. You can see I currently work for EnergyCAP. I've been here for 8 months. But like I said, I've been using this for the past 20 years as I've helped clients out. If you're unfamiliar with EnergyCAP, it's a utility bill management tool. And it has some powerful features called Carbon Hub Smart Analytics. And we help some of our clients with bill capture services. So we offer a robust product here. And certainly that's not the emphasis for today's webinar, but we just wanted to make sure that you were aware of what we are and what we do. So jumping into today's agenda, what I want to do is spend a few minutes summarizing part 1 of this series to make sure that those that are new kind of get the gist of how I approach these shutdowns. I want to spend some time talking about the CFO or the financial leader in an organization, and I think the role that they need to play in order for these shutdowns to go smoothly. I want to spend a lot of time on this idea of reasonable equipment costs. I think you'll be surprised to learn some of the facts and figures that I share with you today. Many people would, if I ask them to estimate the cost of lights or computers, many times people underestimate the value of those things. And hopefully over the course of the next hour, I can teach you a few things and you begin to appreciate more the true value of what it costs to operate some very common equipment. Want to talk about ways to measure some strategies to measure the impact if you aggressively try to execute a shutdown. It's really important to measure it, and so I want to give you some ideas and some strategies to do so, and then we'll close out with some final thoughts. What I'd like to do too at the beginning of these webinars is find out who I'm speaking to. So if we have an influx of a lot of one group of people, I want to make sure that I really try to help people in that particular area that they work. So if you could take a second to respond to this question is, what part of the organization do you represent? Are you with us today coming from your finance department? The second option would be the facilities department. Maybe you're here from the sustainability office. And then the fourth choice is from some other part of your organization. Eric, on my end, I'm not seeing people vote. Oops, there we go. Looks like we got some people jumping in. Okay, so it looks as though we have a lot of people calling in from the facility department, which is awesome. So I do want to reiterate this idea. The part 1 of the video there was a lot of emphasis for facilities with the part 1, so you might double back and see that. I think you'll see great value in today's webinar as well, but I think there will be additional details you might benefit by having from the first part. And then a second question. Let's see, so if we close out this poll and move to the second question, I also wanted to find out the experience that people have in the past with these holiday shutdowns. So I'm guessing some people are attending this webinar really having no experience. So that would be the first choice, that you're excited to give it a try, but you really have no experience. Maybe you have tried it in the past, but it really wasn't very successful. So you're looking for ways to try to make it better. And hopefully you have tried it and you've had some success. And then the fourth choice here is this idea that, yeah, you've had success, but you're really always looking for new suggestions or ideas to try to even make it that much more successful. So if you could just take a second to respond to this poll as well, just so I get a flavor for what your experience has been.
And hey guys, just chiming in from the background, I'm not seeing any votes come in. So Erica, I'm not sure if the audience isn't seeing it. If someone can post in the chat, if you're not able to see it, it should be available to everybody. Either way, again, helpful to know the audience we're speaking to. Okay, Kevin says we're not seeing it. Michael says he just voted.
Yeah, it looks like I've got almost everybody that's waiting.
Amazing.
Almost
Great.
90% participation here. So we'll get the majority that we can and maybe have to troubleshoot those few after.
All good. Okay, great. So if you see the results, I'm sure we'll be able to publish them. So good to know. Sorry about that. And thank you guys all for engaging in the chat and letting us know.
Yeah,
And
no
Danielle,
problem. Thanks for the feedback too. I think
Yeah.
we're just about at 100% participation, actually, almost we're in the high 80s, almost low 90s. So I'm going to go ahead and share these results. There you go.
Perfect. So pretty even split. Other than Looks like the lowest one was yes, and it wasn't very successful. So it looks like people either haven't tried or they've done it with some success. So that's awesome. And hopefully over the next 45 minutes, I can give you some things to think about and ways to improve this for your organization. Awesome. Okay, so with that in mind, now we know who we're talking to. Let's get into the content. Many times when I do these webinars, I like to offer a disclaimer at the beginning because I will litter this webinar with a bunch of recommendations and ideas. But I also want to own up to right at the beginning that every organization is unique, has different savings opportunities, different challenges, different leadership. And so please don't think that I'm suggesting for a second everything I offer is going to work in every location and be successful. So please listen to these webinars. That's why I'm asking you to chime in as we go through, because if you hear something that doesn't quite sound right, maybe I'm either misstating it or it needs some clarification. But please vet this information and translate it into what can be successful for your organization. With that in mind, let's take a look at the calendar and think about what we have coming up here. So many of us in the months ahead have this unique period of time where we have the holidays that occur in November and December. And many times our organizations are going to have the opportunity to operate in a unique way. And usually that means that there's a chance to turn some things off or manage some things in ways that can produce some savings. My guess is everybody on the webinar today has unique calendars and again, things to work around, and the opportunities may be great for some and small for others, but it has to start with your analysis of your calendar. So make sure you look at your calendar, think about what the chances are. And I'd also say don't disregard the month of January. Many times when we behave different and we all enjoy our holiday seasons, we get back to work in January. There's chances in January many times to capture savings as well, because organizations just seem to run different. And by and large, this is happening in locations around the country that are cold versus the warmer ones. But for those of us further to the north where it gets cold, people just leave the house less, and there's just more chances to save. So don't just think this has to end after the first of the year. Take a look at January and see maybe there's other chances for you to save as well. I mentioned during the intro that I wanted to summarize the first webinar we did a few weeks ago, and these were the key ideas. I had laid out in that webinar several different things that you could consider as you try to ramp up your efforts in the facilities or from the facilities team. And here's a summary of that. So the first thing that you have to do is you have to make sure you build a good management team and draft a playbook. And the logical question that might come out of that is, who should be on the management team? Like, who do I need to pull into the conversation in order to make sure that we're doing good preparation for a shutdown? And I would say it needs to be anybody that's influential in your organization. So it has to be the leader, whether that's a superintendent or a president or a CEO. It has to most certainly be the CFO. It has to be leads from the facilities team, probably a leader from the IT department. And if your organization has teachers or groups of staff that have leadership, they need to be involved in that team as well. We have to get everybody sitting around a big table having a conversation about what the opportunities are, and everybody understanding what their roles are in order for the organization to see more savings over these holiday periods of time. During these meetings, you have to draft a playbook, you have to come up with a plan. Hopefully in today's webinar, I can arm you with some information that could be discussed in this. But the general theme here is that people have to come together and get on the same page. The biggest obstacle I've seen in my 20 years on the road working with people is there are breakdowns in communication that occur within the organization. And the impact of that is higher utility bills because things don't get managed as well as they could. The facilities team begins to assume some things, or the staff assumes some things, the leader assumes that these things are taking place. It happens, and I certainly am not throwing any one group under the bus, it happens unilaterally across the organization where there are just breakdowns in communication. So we have to get people together to have a conversation about what's possible. The next thing is we need to identify and prioritize what the energy opportunities are, what the savings opportunities are. And again, today I want to give you an idea of the cost. Like if we were to manage our HVAC different, or we go after the lights, we go after computers, we have to talk about those things. We have to understand our history, the age of the equipment. I want to encourage you to not treat everything the same. You can't paint with a broad brush. You have to look at every building uniquely and its opportunities, its occupancy. You have to go through an analysis and go boom, 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 boom down the list in order to find those opportunities that are the best for your organization. The third part of this plan is, once you identify what the opportunities, you got to get out in the field and you got to test them. A common observation I have in working in many buildings around the country is that many times the assumption is that the control systems, whether they be clocks or building automation systems, they manage the buildings correctly. They turn things on and off the way they're supposed to. And if you're not out there to validate that, and you assume it's going to happen when you go into a shutdown period of time, you're setting yourself up for some struggles. So let's suppose, as an example, that you decide you want to set your buildings back more aggressively between Christmas and New Year's for that week uniquely that occurs at the end of the year. What you need to do if you're going to do that is you need to get people out in the buildings to test it as the weather gets cold in early December to see what happens and make sure the buildings truly are behaving the way that you expect them to behave. If you don't, as I've said, you're likely to have issues. And my guess is you're going to identify some problems that occur there. And it will give you the chance and the opportunity to fix those things before you actually get to the game, okay, the actual game day that occurs for the holiday shutdown. So build that team, put together a strategy, get out there and validate. And then a common step that's missed is this fourth one. We have to get everybody aligned and implement the plan. And usually what that means is we have to train people. Let's not assume that the people in our organization know what needs to get done. Let's provide good detail and good structure. It might be emails that get out to people. It might be training sessions that occur over the course of time. We have to make sure we spend the time and put in the effort to get everybody on the same page. Don't assume. You really get into trouble if you do that. And the last step of this plan is this idea that, you know what, you work real hard to plan the shutdown, you execute the shutdown, you get excited about the results, but sometimes people forget we got to get the buildings back up to snuff when we return back to normal operation. And so if we've set buildings back more aggressively than we have in the past, we have to make sure that we give them enough time to recover. So if building temperatures usually never get lower than 65, and now our buildings are down to 60 or something, we have to make sure we turn them on in plenty of time. We have to develop contingency plans to make sure that we have people out and ready and confirming, because we don't want to have any problems. And so will there be problems? To be honest, likely if you're going through this for the first time, there will be a few. But if you put together good contingency plans, everybody knows what you're trying to achieve. Usually people are patient and they're understanding. And the next one gets better, and the one after that gets better and better. And so what I've tried to lay out over the course of the last 5 to 10 minutes here is this is the structure of the overall plan. And in the first webinar, I provided more detail. But with that in mind, what I want to focus on now is the CFO's role in this. Because sometimes the CFO sees his or her role as being distant from these opportunities. They think this is a facilities thing. Facilities has to go through and take care of all this. And I would say there's nothing further from the truth. If a shutdown is going to be as successful as possible, the CFO has to be right in the middle of the planning. It's critically important that they get involved in this effort. And there's a couple of reasons why. Most organizations, the person who's in charge of the purse, in charge of the books, they're seen in a very positive light, and people respect and understand the authority that they have. And so it stimulates change in the organizations, and people will take it more seriously than if the CFO plays a back seat in this role. So we need to make sure that the CFO is actively involved. The CFO needs to meet with the facilities lead and really the whole facilities team to understand what the opportunities are and what the challenges are. Because the CFO usually has the ability to encourage and promote and provide solutions, financial solutions for problems that the facility lead person can communicate. So the CFO needs to get actively involved, needs to listen to the concerns, and they need to invest in some of the repairs and control solutions. I mentioned a few minutes ago that if we do a dry run, or we spend the time in early December, or maybe even over the holiday shutdown, if you have time in November to understand better what's happening with your facilities, it gives you time to invest in repairs and control solutions. And now typically you're not making some type of major project, but let's suppose you have a building and you have a couple air handling units that are not communicating with the building automation system. Well, it's probably worth the time, the effort, the money to get somebody out between the holiday seasons, between Thanksgiving and Christmas, to make a repair or to bring things into control so that you have the opportunity for managing it different for 7 or 10 or 14 days over the holiday season. Again, the CFO has to be part of these conversations. They have to understand that. And something I've learned in my experience is that many times the facilities team is hesitant to ask for money. I've worked with many facility leaders who want to come in under budget. They see that as part of their role, as they want to prove how good they do the work and that they don't need all the budget. We can fix things and manage the buildings without spending all the budget. And because I've seen this with some regularity in moving around the country, I want to teach the CFO that we need to listen to what the concerns are and we need to interject and we need to fix some of these things and not delay these things. And many times these are not major repairs. These are relatively inexpensive repairs or adjustments that can be made in order to capture savings over the holidays. I also want to highlight these problems are not going away. They're only going to get more expensive. So if you pay to repair it in 2025, it's going to be cheaper than paying to repair it in 2026 or 2027. I want to encourage the CFO because once again, their leadership and their authority, encourage others to get out of their comfort zone. And one of the groups of people with regularity that I see who is challenged to do things different is the IT department. The IT department as a whole, and I'm certainly not trying to throw people under the bus here, just trying to mention that there's a pattern that the IT department is trying to always keep people's computers active, make sure all the networks are functioning properly. And so there's a concern that when we start to turn things off or adjust things, things are not going to work properly. Hopefully in the next half hour, I can justify the value of doing that, but it takes the CFO communicating to the IT leader that we need to take a look at these things. We need to consider these as opportunities. And if we have issues, we'll work together to resolve them. The CFO is uniquely positioned to have those conversations with people and provide the financial resources if things don't go well. So with that in mind, all of this boils down to, I would never encourage any organization to do something if it's not beneficial. So we have to consider all of these recommendations and all of our work. We have to weigh the benefit versus the effort to do so. And as an example, I would never encourage, let's say, for instance, that you try to shut down a building that has time clocks on it, where it would take, kind of a silly example, let's say it takes you an hour to try to turn this building off by adjusting clocks or doing things. And the savings you're going to get from spending that hour is $50. We're all too busy to invest so much time to get very little payback. And so my example is kind of silly, but I think you get the point that you need to invest your time and effort into things that have value. And that's why I think in the next 10 minutes, as I go through some of these costs, you can see and hopefully identify things that have more value. One last thought for the CFO is it's easy to dismiss these initiatives with poor ROI, but what about if you never do these things? You know, if every project you don't do has no payback associated with it. Part of this is a mindset. These problems are not going to go away. So you can't dismiss opportunities because they have poor ROI. We need to get these things repaired and fixed, because if you don't, you're going to be paying higher utility bills for the rest of the time you're there. You got to own the problem and you got to work through it. And hopefully the shutdowns can be part of the impetus for doing that. So let's talk a little bit about how to calculate your costs with electricity. I wanted to just give you a little bit of structure here, and nothing fancy about this. My guess is many of you on the webinar today have seen this, but ultimately, if you're trying to calculate your electrical costs, what you need to do is you need to find the wattage that's on the serial plate, whether it's a computer, whether it's a radio, whether it's a pump that you might see out in the field. Usually the wattage is there, and if it's not there, usually you have the ability to see the voltage and the amperage, and you can multiply them in order to figure out the wattage. So let's figure out the wattages of those devices. Make sure we're converting into to kW. So we might have to divide those wattages by 1,000 to turn them into kilowatts. We need to figure out how many hours that device is running, because that's part of the calculation. So you're getting the wattage, you're converting to kW, you're figuring out the number of hours. And then we also have to multiply by the rate of electricity. So I have here in this fourth bullet, it says you can estimate your total bill by using the kW used, and the national average rate for electricity is 13 cents. Guessing many of you on the call are in parts of the country that have average unit cost rates of less than 13 cents. And half of you on the call have rates that are greater than 13 cents. I mean, that's why it's an average. What you want to do is find out the number that's specific in your area. And I will also say, in doing the calculation of cost, this is an approximation. Calculating the true cost in your electric bill is complicated because of all the line items that are on the bill. You have demand, you have energy, you have all sorts of different fixed fee costs. So using this technique, in this case of 13 cents, gets you in the ballpark. But if you wanted a more exact calculation, you're going to have to dig deeper in. And if you want any help with that, you can reach out to me. I'm happy to teach you more about your electric bill. Ultimately, what you got to do is take each of the things I mentioned, you multiply them, and you come up with the total cost. So I've got an example here, and I want to talk about computers for a few minutes. So using that same formula again, how much energy you're using, how many hours you're using it, and what's the rate. And so what you see on the screen here is an example of a typical computer. Could you find a laptop or a computer that uses significantly less than 100 watts? You could. Could you find one that uses way more than 100 watts? You absolutely could. And so what I'm trying to do with the 100 watts here is capture the CPU part of the computer as well as the monitor. And again, just get you in the ballpark. So if you have 100 watts of computer running 24 hours a day at an average rate of 13 cents per kilowatt hour, got to divide by the 1,000. The math turns out that you're spending 31 cents a day for a computer. Now I want to talk about that a little bit and unpack that. So if it's 31 cents a day for the 30 days in a month, you're looking at $10 a month. So what I want you to do when you think about computers is that every single one of them that you have that's running for a month is cost you $10. Now, that in and of itself, I think is a little bit eye-opening, but the real thing is, how many computers does your organization have? Do you have 500? Do you have 1,000? Do you have 5,000 computers? And if every one of those is running 24 hours a day, every day of the month, you can see how quickly that's going to add up. And it screams, we need to put together a strategy to manage that. What I tell people for a simple way to think about computers is that computers cost you about a quarter per day. Just it's relatable, it's understandable, costs you about a quarter per day. And you probably have to spend a dime a day in order to operate your computer to do your job. But you have the opportunity to save more than 15 cents a day if you put it on some type of schedule. And so again, this gets back to the IT department and making sure that we're all on the same page and putting together strategies to power these computers down or to put them into sleep mode. But this is hard because of the updates that have to occur with computers and things connecting to networks. And I would never blindly encourage anybody to just go for it. Get people around a table, talk about how the network is being operated, get counts, understand how many computers you have, how many printers do you have, how many items are on the network, and what things can be managed and what's the financial benefit. And that's the point of this whole webinar, is getting people together to have a reasonable understanding what the cost is. And now let's work together to figure out how better to manage it. Next thing I want to give you is some information about lights. The cost to operate LED lights, I've given you a few examples here, like an office space. Again, it's difficult to estimate because you can have offices that are big and offices that are small. You can have old lights, you have new lights. But by and large, if you were to take all of that and average it out, I would say a typical office space costs you about $0.05 an hour to operate the lights. We've all been in classrooms. And again, we probably have a feel for what a normal classroom is. We've had huge classrooms and tiny classrooms, but a typical classroom is about 1,000 square feet. And I tell people it costs about $0.10 an hour to operate the lights. So every hour those lights are left on, when people have gone, if motion sensors have failed and the lights are not turning off, it's going to cost you about $0.10 an hour. Gives you a reasonable estimate. Gymnasiums. Here, a gymnasium, and this assumes, once again, the gym has been retrofitted with LED lights. Costs about 50 cents to maybe $2 an hour to operate a gym. It can cost you 3 times that if you have old lights. So gyms in these bigger spaces, cafeteria spaces, open spaces in an organization, again, the numbers just get big fast, particularly if the lights are older. Parking lot lights, I have an estimate here anywhere from $2 to maybe $10 if you have a particularly large parking lot, or those of you that might be on the call today that are at a university on a campus and you have parking structures here. I mean, you're talking $20, $30 an hour to have the lights on, something like that. So again, just giving you a context or a flavor of the cost. And I threw out another one here because my guess is nearly everybody on the call is been to a football field, a high school football field, and you have a sense of what the lights look like, in this situation, it could cost you anywhere maybe between $2 to $4 an hour to operate those lights. So if you're in an environment where those lights gets left on, people ignore those lights, they stay on all night. Here, for easy math, you might average and say it costs you about $3 an hour, and if they're left on all night, maybe you're losing $25 just because the lights in the football field get left on. So here again, just trying to give you a context, and also want to bring to your attention that these are LED costs. These are not fluorescent costs or high pressure sodium costs, incandescent costs. All of those would be much greater. So this is lighting that has already been retrofitted, and it's less expensive to operate than those older things. And hopefully I've given you this idea that, you know, if you ignore these things, if this is just left on all the time, boy, it can add up fast. I mean, you take $2 and start to multiply it 10, and you're doing it 30 days a month, and whew, the numbers get big fast. Let's jump into this idea about motors, give you a feeling to how to calculate the value of turning a motor off. So the easiest calculation is to convert horsepower into kW. So 1 horsepower is a fraction, it's 0.7457 kW. And if we do the calculation where a 10 horsepower motor, we can convert into 7.5 kW. Let's use the same formula we're in calculating the value of the lights. So we can take that 7.5, if that motor is running for 24 hours a day at that 13 cents rate, it's going to cost us about $23 per day to run that 10 horsepower motor. Many times those motors are running 24 hours a day because they're part of a bigger system that needs to run 24 hours a day. So again, if you take that $23 a day, you multiply by 30, you do a little bit of rounding, you know, you're looking at roughly $750 to run that motor for a month. Now that becomes pretty significant, but it's only significant if you can turn that motor off, if there's a reasonable opportunity. And the place where I've seen for most organizations where they can begin to turn motors off is in the heating system. Many heating systems have redundant pumping, where there are multiple pumps that are set up to push the water around an organization. And sometimes facility folks decide to run all the pumps as a safety net. And I would say there's a significant cost that comes with that, because there are situations where I've been looking at a 50 horsepower pump or a 100 horsepower pump, and so the numbers just get enormous fast. My point here is understand the cost of those motors and see if there's opportunities to do something a little bit different. I want to spend some time talking about exhaust fans, because ultimately what drives an exhaust fan is a motor. And I also want to talk about air handling units and pumps a little bit more. And I want to transition to this next slide to help you see how this works. So here, I jokingly say exhaust fans really suck because they can really drain your budget fast, but they're sucking a lot of air, more air than what you realize. And what you see in this picture here is a typical setup that allows me to teach and explain what's happening in most situations. So if you can see my cursor move a little bit here in the top right-hand corner, you've got an exhaust fan, which is very common in buildings. Many times there are dozens. I mean, heck, there could be hundreds of exhaust fans that are pulling air out of a building. In this picture, again, if you're familiar with these things, these fans probably could be a 0.5 horsepower motor or a 1 horsepower motor. They're relatively small, but where the math gets significant is when you have dozens and dozens of them. All of a sudden, now you're looking at a lot of energy use. But my story here is that we've got to get this fan controlled. I've got the picture here in a kitchen space. So we've got this kitchen hood, and usually the kitchen hood fan, this exhaust fan, is significantly more powerful, and the motor's much larger in size because it's intended to move a much greater volume of air. So this particular fan that might be in the kitchen is probably going to be a much bigger motor, and it's more important to get that sucker turned off than a smaller fan for a bathroom. So managing the motor is important, yes, but I want to talk through what people forget about if they ignore that. Let's suppose somebody has the logic. They say, you know what, my grill here or my stove has pilot lights on it, so I want to leave the kitchen hood on and always ventilate the kitchen so there's no buildup of fumes in the kitchen. I see the logic in that. It makes sense, other than the fact you've disregarded the fact that this fan is constantly removing the air from the kitchen. And usually these fans are big enough that they can take all of the air that's in the kitchen and extract it in an hour's time. And because these fans can be moving thousands of cubic feet of air, and that in and of itself is not good, But what's even worse is if you take all the air out of the kitchen, it has to be put back in by other air. Air has to come in to replace it. And so in this picture here, where you have fresh air, there's going to be dampers in these rooftop units to prevent air from directly flowing into the space. But because of the difference in pressure, air is going to be squeezed through the damper and it's going to be pulled into the kitchen, or it's going to be pulled from other parts of the building. And this typically is air that you do not want. It's air that's coming from the outside that's cold or humid. And so that one exhaust fan has a cost associated with it just simply because of you're running a motor. But the consequence is you're bringing a lot of air into your space, and very likely you don't want that air. And if it's particularly cold outside, you're going to have to heat that air in order to keep your building at a reasonable temperature. And so the exhaust fans need to be controlled. If I can stress one thing from a facility standpoint, if you are going to aggressively shut down your buildings, you absolutely have to have a plan to control your exhaust fans. Even the small bathroom fans, there has to be a plan. And many times in old buildings, those fans are controlled by switches on the wall. So it involves people, it involves coordination and discussion, but don't ignore the fans. Whoops. I want to take you through this idea of refrigeration costs. So let's transition into just looking at what a refrigerator rate costs. And I'll give you several different examples here. Guessing, once again, many on the webinar have been in dorm rooms. We've seen those cube style refrigerators. So we all have a sense of what they look like and how big they are. And if I just had to ballpark a cost of operating those cube refrigerators, it's anywhere between $2 and $4 a month. And it's going to vary, again, based on where you're at and your electrical rates as well as the size, but it just gives you a range. A typical kitchen refrigerator, and again, I'm assuming just in most of our homes, we have a refrigerator that's kind of the normal size, just kind of typical. It's going to be on average about $10, but could range anywhere from $8 to $12 a month. One of these mobile milk coolers, this example or the picture that I have here on the right-hand side, that'll cost you anywhere between $40 and $60 a month based on rates and based on how much it's open and closed. And walk-in refrigeration units, something that's 8 by 8, and that's relatively small. That's not a very big walk-in refrigerator, but on average, that's maybe $120 a month to operate. Whereas a walk-in freezer, something a little bit bigger, could maybe be on average about $400 a month. So many times when I talk with people, they just have no sense, and hopefully I provided a little bit of better understanding. And also, as you're doing your planning for the shutdown, think about, for your organization, is it worth it? I have helped dozens and dozens of schools shut down these milk coolers between the last day of school for students before a Christmas break, and then have them turned on a day or two before students return after the holiday season. There's great value in managing that equipment. As long as you test it, you've got the people to do it, because every single one of them is going to be saving you $15, $20, $25 over the course of those couple weeks that you're off. And the powerful part is the multiplier, the fact that you're doing this with dozens and dozens and dozens of pieces of equipment. And so for your organization, take a look at these refrigeration costs and see if there's value in managing things a little bit different. And now the big one. I've come up with a formula here that I've shared with others through the years that I stand by, because I just looked at a lot of numbers. And this, what I'm going to offer you in the next couple of minutes here, could easily be challenged, and somebody could dismiss this and say it's not very close. And I agree with that. So I am not trying to suggest that what I offer here in the next couple of minutes is going to work every single time. But I also have learned that people need to have some understanding of the value of turning off equipment. And that's the intent here, is I wanted to give people an idea of the benefit of going from an occupied state to an unoccupied state for their organization. So this is my method, which I own, and I say this. I say, if you take the building square footage and you drop the last 3 zeros and cut it in half, this will give you a ballpark estimate to how much it costs to operate the HVAC in that particular building. So let me unpack that with this example down here. If you had a 100,000 square foot building, you drop the 3 zeros, it becomes 100, and you divide by 2. What I'm saying is, to operate that building, it's going to cost you about $50 an hour to run the HVAC. Now, again, reiterating, if this is a heat pump building versus a boiler building versus, it's being cooled with a chiller, I mean, you could come up with all sorts of scenarios where the $50 is way less than what it should be. and probably come up with many scenarios where $50 is way more than what it should be, or representation of the cost of this building. But I would stick by that this gets you in the ballpark. And why I think this is important is, let's suppose you have a building that's 100,000 square feet and you want to try to keep that thing into an unoccupied state between the holidays. So let's say for 7 days, and you have no idea what the savings value of that is. Where I would begin to estimate is, I'd say, you know what, if you're saving $50 an hour and the building normally runs 10 hours a day, so it costs you about $500 a day to operate that building, and you have the opportunity now to manage it for 7 days, 7 times the 500, I'm going to say ballpark, the opportunity to manage that is to save about 3,500 bucks. And I'm guessing you're going to be pretty close to that when all is said and done. And so use this as an estimate. I'd also say, you know, roll this up, these totals up for you and your organization to think about how much in mass your organization spends. So let's take this 100,000 square foot building, and let's say you are managing 10 million square feet of space. Let's drop the last 3 zeros. Let's divide it by 2. This number now is going to become $5,000 per hour. So I would make the bold statement that when you have 10 million square feet and you're in full operation to operate your buildings, it's going to be somewhere in the magnitude of about $5,000 an hour. So if you're in operation for 10 hours a day, you're spending $50,000 a day just to keep your 10 million square feet alive and occupied. So use this number at your discretion, see if it makes sense, do some calculations, overlay it with your utility data. And my guess is you're going to see it's going to put you in the ballpark. And I think it's really important when trying to work with your CFO and the facilities director to talk about what the opportunities are, because this will help you to decide what has value and what doesn't, so you put your effort and energy into the places that bring the most value. I also want to make a case for being more aggressive with your setbacks. I've got a chart here which is just showing some recommended temperature settings. And I don't know whether I necessarily agree with these. I found this chart available online, and I know some people really promote this. I think both of these settings are more aggressive than what I would recommend, where they recommend a heating setting of 68. I know for many organizations that's tough to do. I think it's more realistic that you're going to be in the 70-degree range. And for cooling, many organizations struggle to cool down or above 70, 73, or 74, where many times, people want to cool down to 72. So I can challenge those values. And what I don't challenge is this idea of how much things cost or how much you can save by changing the numbers. And that's the point of this particular diagram. If we just take a look at the heating, so on the left-hand side, essentially what this is saying is if we can keep the temperatures below our recommended setting, we have the opportunity to save significantly by keeping the temperature a few degrees less. And notice how quickly the costs increase if we end up operating at temperatures that are higher. Now, the discussion about occupied temperature, in my mind, is different than unoccupied temperatures. I think you have to keep people comfortable and to some extent cater to their comfort levels. And that's why I think the reasonable temperatures for heating are probably closer to 70, and for cooling 72, 73. Where I compromise less and where I think the true value of savings is in the setback temperatures. I want to encourage you to be more aggressive with the setback temperatures. If your organization currently is setting back, say, to 65 degrees or 62 degrees, I want to encourage you to go to 58 or go to 55. Once again, I've helped many, many organizations cross that bridge where they had fears of setting temperatures back to 55 degrees because they were worried about the condition of the buildings and recovering those buildings. I would not suggest doing this across your entire portfolio and changing everything at once, but I would suggest that you methodically work through it and understand how the buildings respond, because some buildings can very comfortably be set back from an occupied temperature of 70 in the wintertime to an unoccupied temperature of 55. They can recover quickly and perform well, and they will be using the least amount of energy possible if you can function in that particular way. So try to be more aggressive with your setbacks and understand your environment. Those of you that are in warm weather climates, I know your challenges are less about temperature maybe and more about humidity. Make sure you get the training and understanding you need in order to be aggressive, in order to keep those temperatures in a way that will maximize your savings. I want to circle back, and I mentioned this in the first webinar that we had a couple weeks ago, something that I believe strongly in, and our founder, Steve Hines here at EnergyCAP, this is his lingo, so I want to give him credit for. But what Steve says is if you can't turn it off, set it back. And if you can't set it back, tune it up. Just want to talk about this a little bit more. The idea is this: as you evaluate the opportunity for these shutdowns, where you have to start is looking at all of this stuff and ask yourself the question, can it be safely turned off? Will it turn back on reasonably? Will it take a lot of effort? Is there a financial benefit for turning it off? And if you can meet all the criteria, first and foremost, turn it off. If for some reason you can't turn it off, then let's set it back. And I use the term set it back, meaning maybe we're changing the temperature, or we're adjusting it up or adjusting it down in a way that it's still in operation, but it's using less energy because somebody is not there to need it. So let's turn it down a little bit. Let's set it back. So if you can't turn it off and you can't turn it down, then let's tune it up. If you have stuff that is running 24/7 or nearly 24/7, that's always going to be hitting your bottom line. So let's make sure that it's running as efficiently as possible and spend some time, effort, and money in making sure that it's tuned up and running properly. So with that as an approach, I think if you approach your whole shutdown with this in mind, it really helps you to identify with some of the things I've given you previously about the costs. It really helps steer you towards where your biggest opportunities lie. So over the first 45 minutes of the webinar, I've tried to talk a lot about how to manage stuff and give you strategies. What I want to do for a little while here is talk about now the money part of this. And I see that there are just two different ledgers that need to be managed when you look at your energy management efforts. I described that there's always going to be raw savings that happens. In my mind, what raw savings is if you were to compare a bill from last month or last year to a bill this month, you always can net out the actual pennies, the dollars and cents of how much you saved. And I think you need to keep track of that. From the CFO's perspective, it's just critical, right? We're trying to meet budgets and we have to pay bills. So having real savings and a real analysis of data is really important. But I'd also say a tool that many choose not to use is this idea of cost avoidance. Cost avoidance is where we're considering the weather impact. We're considering other factors that are influencing how much things cost and the benefit of things. And I think if you don't measure cost avoidance, if you ignore the impact that's happening in your organization when you attempt these shutdowns, then I think you're not telling the full story. And let me give you this one example to hopefully help you see. The idea is, let's suppose last year you attempted no shutdown in your organization. This year you attempt a shutdown, and at the same time, this year you saw your electrical bill rise by 10% because the rates increased, something that was beyond your control. So when you net it out, when you compare this year with last year, the bill is virtually the same, yet you've put all this time and effort into shutting the buildings down, and you've got no way of proving that if you're only looking at the raw numbers. I would argue that that's not an accurate representation of what took place. If you put effort in and you manage things better, you avoided spending money because you took action, and there's got to be a way to measure that. And that's what I want to talk about now with this chart here. You need to have a tool that can allow you to measure cost avoidance. And I've mentioned this in the past, those of you that are seeing one of my webinars for the second or third or fourth time. So I brought this up in the past, but let me take and explain this diagram over here to the right. The idea is this, is what you need to do is establish some baseline conditions. And what the software we have at EnergyCAP does is it takes your consumption and it breaks into two pieces. A dark blue piece here, shown in the picture, is your base consumption, and a light blue piece that's the weather. The idea being this, is weather on most meters has some effect in terms of how much you use. You need to disaggregate the data and understand how much you're going to use regardless of weather and how much is attributable to the weather. If you want to do a fair comparison to see how last year compared with this year, what you do is you have to take last year's data and adjust it to today's conditions. And you might notice this middle bar looks a little different than the one on the left. You might say, hey, Tom, the blue part, the dark blue part's bigger here than it is here. And you might say, what would cause that? And my answer would be, is you might have a 28-day billing cycle back here, and this now is a 32-day billing cycle. So you would expect to use more energy in a 32-day period than you did in a 28-day period. So the software has to adjust for billing period length. And you might also notice the weather part of these bars is smaller. And what this is saying is the weather in the base period was more severe than it was in the current conditions. And you certainly don't want to take credit for saving more if the weather is less severe. And you don't want to be penalized if the weather is more severe this year than it was last year. You want the weather to be pulled out as a variable so you can truly see how you performed. So by taking the base year, the baseline conditions, adjusting it to today's conditions, and then comparing it to the actual conditions, you can net out. And what you see here in the picture is this idea. In my example, you'd have savings. It would show that you actually saved based on your efforts. Now, is cost avoidance always going to be positive, meaning you're always going to be saving? No, there will be times that you will be losing because things have changed. But my main point with going through this explanation is that you need to do this comparison to do a fair comparison between last year and this year to look at how you performed and do your assessment. If you don't, you're at risk of taking all this time and effort for these shutdowns and maybe not having good data to justify that. And that'll hurt you. It'll erode your credibility. So make sure you've got a good tool. This is simply a graph showing similar information and taking a minute to explain it. Over here on the left-hand side, this axis is energy. So the dark blue line going across the graph represents your energy use. And here in the middle, we've got this red region, which is saying that you did something different. There's an installation period. You put in new equipment, or that installation period could be your shutdown. You had an event that took place and you managed things different. The dark blue continues to look at your energy usage, but the green line that's formed here becomes what you would have used had you not done anything. And so the green shaded region represents how much you avoided spending as a result of taking action, again, in this red region, which could be representative of your shutdown. So using cost avoidance in this analysis is so important in order for you to be credible and have the information to share with your team afterwards in discussing the shutdown. I have a few more pictures I just want to go through quickly here. These are pictures of some real-time data. And if you're not familiar with this, it's data that's flowing into a system, and you can look at the performance of your buildings in real time or near real time. This black line going across the picture represents your electrical use over time. The green region represents where you normally are. And so it allows you to see when you're outside of that. This real-time data is very helpful in doing analysis after a shutdown to find out how did you perform relative to what you expected. People want to see pictures, people want to see numbers, people want to see data. And so by having that data, it really justifies all of the effort that went into a shutdown. Another example of that is this. Here's a picture where you might use it to calculate a return on analysis. Here you've got 5 different humps in the data. Each one of these represents a day of the week. And if you notice here in the middle of the picture, it's flat because that would represent a weekend time. The powerful part of using this type of real-time data is it gives you values. And I just want to bring to your attention down in the bottom right-hand corner here. You can figure out how much energy you're using on schedule and how much energy off schedule. It allows you to do the math. And I gave you a calculation a few minutes ago about you're going to ultimately use the square footage of a building in order to estimate the value of managing things different. This type of data allows you to turn that into real numbers and do a calculation to determine the real savings that occurred. This one here is just a picture showing real-time data, and it might allow you to expose a water leak. So the green line here near 0 is showing that you had very little usage or no usage, and all of a sudden you turn the meter on, went back to 0, but at some point, it's like the meter is showing use like it can never be turned off. Again, the purpose of this data is really helpful in order to assess your buildings, see how they perform all times, but in particular over shutdown periods of time where you've made an effort to manage them different. You can really expose opportunities and errors and win people's support because they can appreciate what has changed. So with that in mind, just some final thoughts. Hopefully over the course of the last 45 minutes or so, I've given you some ideas, some things to think about. The main gist is if you're looking at this through the lens of a CFO or through the finance, you have to have an appreciation and understanding of what things roughly cost. allows you to put together a plan and a strategy for attacking items or building teams in order to manage things different. And then at the end of the day, after you go through this process, hopefully you have success, you can quantify it and share those results with your team transparently, and they can appreciate and see the success that occurred over that time. So with that in mind, we've got about 5 to 10 minutes left. Daniela, Erica, did any questions come in through? Or does anybody, I guess, let me open it up for questions. Anybody who might be on the webinar.
Yes, so we did have a few questions come in, and I just post a reminder in the chat. If anyone has anything else, please go ahead and toss those in as well. We've got 3 in the log. So, okay, first one is, historically, my organization has been very resistant to change. Sounds relatable, I'm sure. Where and how do you start planning for a shutdown? And I know
Yeah.
you've talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but good refresher for the group.
Yeah. You know, it goes back to just building that team. You have to bring people together. And this is where the leadership becomes so important. If you and your organization are responsible for this, say you're the energy manager, what you need to do is win the support of your leadership team. Spend some time with them, convince them what's possible, share data with them, roll up some numbers so you can predict what the opportunity is for them. But it really comes from relationships. And it comes with a reasonable expectation that change is hard for many people. It really is. And so you have to approach it with a certain psychology and a certain expectation. What I've urged people to do over time is I use the term people need to be patiently persistent. If you're going to be successful in energy management, you can't give up because there's going to be resistance along the way. So by being patiently persistent, you set yourself up for success in the long haul.
Thank you. Thank you. We've got another one, and this one also is hypothetical, but knowing the fact that you know how many dollars it takes to run a gymnasium per hour, I think you'll have some ideas for this. For a typical organization, what is a reasonable amount of savings they could achieve in the first year of planning?
Yeah. So circling all the way back to the beginning of the webinar, we asked the question, who is new to this? And I think about a third of you said you were really starting to do this for the first time. And it'd be interesting to see others weigh into the chat if somebody has data. But what I would say, what I have observed in helping brand new organizations with some planning time, like if you don't start planning until December 15th, then you're really going to struggle. But if you start now a couple months ahead of time, I've seen many organizations save 10% on their utility bills, on the gas bill and electric bill in just the first year, because of the impact and building momentum. And I've seen other organizations save as much after doing it for 2, 3, 4 years, where they're saving 30, 40, 50% on their December utility bill because their break is long enough, the planning is consistent and organized. But to answer the question, Daniela, usually the first year, I think a reasonable goal might be 10% on the buildings that you affect, right? Let's say you've got $1 million utility budget and you're not going to try to affect all of your buildings. Well, then you only can apply that 10% to the buildings you're trying to affect. So if you try to impact all of your buildings on that $1 million that you spend, and let's say 1/12 of it's being spent in December, so you're spending roughly $100,000. So 10% of that $100,000, you're going to save about $10,000. And hopefully I didn't do that math too quickly, but hopefully the point is made. It's going to affect just the month that you are trying to influence.
Awesome. Thank you. And then last one we have in the queue, unless someone posts stuff while you are answering this one, is a 55-degree setback a good idea? We are worried about freezing our equipment and having failures.
Yeah, it is. The answer is yes. It is absolutely a good idea in the right environment. If you do some things ahead of time, take some precautions ahead of time. If you're in a cold environment, let's say you're in the northern part of the US, you're in Canada, where the temperatures get really extreme during these times when you want to turn things down or set things back, you need to get out and confirm that your dampers are working correctly, that systems are recovering properly. But yes, 55 degrees will work fine as long as you do your homework ahead of time. And what I'd say, if you haven't been aggressive in the past, I would not encourage you to go from, say, 65 down to 55 in one fell swoop. Nibble away at it. Go from 65 to 62 and then 62 to 60 and just keep checking it. And I'd also say do this with the buildings that have the most robust heating systems. So if you have heat pumps, for instance, where they just don't recover very well, then don't start there. Usually they can do it. I mean, there's certainly many cases when things can be done, but make sure you're also being smart about it. Be strategic, and I think you'll have more success.
Great. Well, like I always like to say, few questions means Tom covered all the things that anyone could ever think about. So good job, Tom. I know we're at the top of the hour, so Eric, I'll let you wrap up, and we appreciate partnering with you guys on this webinar.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom, for a great presentation today. And thanks to all of you who attended as well. As a reminder, your credit for your one professional development hour can be accessed by logging onto your member compass on our website, appa.org. And then just a couple other reminders. Today's webinar, as I said earlier, will be made available through our website, appa.org, and our Vimeo channel, as well as through EnergyCAP's website. We appreciate everyone's engagement today. Thanks for being super active in the chat. And thanks to Daniela for being just a fantastic moderator there as well. So don't forget to check out part 1 of the holiday shutdown series, which Daniela did post way up top in the chat. And then, as I said, this one, part 2, will be available within the next 24 hours. We hope everyone has a great rest of your day. And thanks again for coming. Thanks for hosting, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.